Hi everybody, welcome to UDW's Facebook page and our Facebook Live conversation on the new electronic visit verification mandate for IHSS and other personal care services programs in California. I am Christina Boss-Hamilton. I'm the Legislative Director for UDW here in Sacramento. We are in our SAC office. It's a lot of construction outside, so it's kind of loud. I'll be sure to speak up so you can hear us clearly. Today I am joined by Jordan Lindsey, who is the Executive Director for the ARC of California, and he's here to talk with me today about EVV. So Jordan, can you say hi?
Hi everybody. Jordan Lindsey with the ARC of California. The ARC represents people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as well as their families. So in California, that's primarily individuals who are served by the regional centers throughout California, and we have service providers throughout the state, and the ARC has been around for 50 plus years advocating for people with developmental disabilities.
Excellent. Thanks for coming, Jordan. It's great to build a partnership with you all on these issues. They're clearly the same population of folks, and we have the same concerns. So why don't we start talking a little bit about where EVV came from? We know that this is a major cause for concern. A lot of questions have been coming. In fact, we want to stress to you that UDW has been opposed to EVV from the beginning. We did submit our letter to the Department of Social Services in the fall indicating our opposition, and we continue to oppose EVV, but we're here to talk about what we know. What is it? Where did it come from? What exactly does it say? And where do we go from here? And I'll just say now, we don't have all the answers. There's still a lot to be figured out, but in the meanwhile, let's share the information that we have. So, Jordan, could you tell us a little bit where EVV came from?
So EVV, electronic visit verification, was from a federal law that was passed called the 21st Century Cures Act. And the Cures Act was primarily focused on prescription medications, etc. But in that law, buried a little bit down in there, was this provision on EVV. And it doesn't say a ton, but in essence it says that states must implement a EVV system for home care services by January 1st, 2019, and home health services by January 1st, 2023. Or if they don't, then they will have to, they will suffer a penalty in their Medicaid reimbursement from the federal government. And so there's been a little bit of guidance, but not a whole lot since then, but that's where EVV originated, is in that 21st Century Cures Act that was passed by the federal government.
Okay, so states have the option to do it, but if they don't do it, they will lose funding for the programs, basically.
Correct, and in California, because our program and our state is so large, it's quite a lot of money. We're talking tens of millions of dollars over the next few years. So while what we understand is that the state considered whether or not to implement it, from what we know now is that the state is planning on implementing EVV.
Right, so that's something that we did recently get verification on. We did get a copy of the state's estimate of the penalty. I think it's really important to note because, like Jordan just said, it's not a small amount of money. So basically, it starts next year. It's like 0.25%, and then it grows each year exponentially. So the problem is, this isn't a one-time loss of money. This is a loss over time that grows. So in the first year, we would lose $15.5 million. By the fifth year, the state will be reduced $219 million. So that means that we will have $200 million less to fund IHSS and the other personal care services programs that Medicaid funds here in California. So clearly that's a big problem, because if the state does not implement IHSS, we'll have to figure out what happens with resulting from this lost funding. Do we find some new funding? Do we just make do somehow? Clearly nobody wants to reduce services or reduce wages or do anything like that. So this isn't, unfortunately, a clear-cut problem.
Right. I think it's been really challenging for a lot of states and a lot of advocates to consider and balance the pros and cons of this. While we know about a dozen states so far have moved forward implementing it, and California has moved forward with a stakeholder process, at least initial, while we expect and would advocate that there'd be a whole lot more stakeholder process and engagement. It's been a conversation that I think a lot of people have had to balance what is the right approach here. But to our understanding, California is moving forward. So now it really is, what do we know? What can we try to do? What can we expect from here forward?
So for folks just joining us, this is Christina Boss-Hamilton. I'm here with Jordan Lindsey from the ARC of California. We are talking about the new electronic visit verification, EVV, mandate from the federal government and how it would impact IHSS. So why don't we recap what has happened so far? So the law was passed in December of 2016. We actually opposed it. Our parent union, AFSCME in Washington, did lobby against this provision being inserted, but because it was an omnibus bill that actually addressed a lot of different issues, including opioid funding and mental health, it was a huge bill that had a lot of lobbying and interests advocating on its behalf, and unfortunately the provision was inserted. So it was passed, it kind of went under the radar for a bunch of months, and then in the early fall, the Department of Social Services did convene a stakeholder meeting where you could call in or you could come in person, just to, I would say, is a listening session for them to talk about what the law was and what it said, and get a sense of where folks were at. And I did attend that. It was probably 3 hours long. It was very upsetting for people. A lot of feedback, especially from folks on the phone, not understanding how this would work with how home care works.
Yeah. So the main concerns that we are hearing from both the consumers, people with disabilities, as well as the providers, is that this is an issue of privacy and a violation of privacy. And there's a lot of concerns, but this is definitely the one that we're hearing most. And in it, that provision would require a mode of geo-tracking so that an individual, the consumer, would be able to, would have to check in at a certain location, and it has to be an approved location, whether that is their home or in other approved locations. So what does that mean? I think that still has to be worked out, is how many approved locations could a person have to be checked in at. If they don't check in at their approved location, then that is an exception that has to be approved by the paying authority. And so how many times does an exception have to be approved? So also tracking where people are going, when they're checking in, who they're with. So there's definitely a lot of privacy concerns, and rightfully so. I think a lot of people are concerned that the data would be sent either could be sent to a State Department or a private company, this application that would be tracking where and when and with whom a person is with. And so would this violate a person's independence via Olmstead decision, or would it restrict them to be at home more often than not? And we're working hard to protect the privacy and the rights of providers and the individuals who are utilizing the services. Also a concern is implementation. How is this actually practically going to work, along with privacy concerns? How does a person check in? Some states would have required a landline check-in. Well, obviously not everybody has landlines anymore, and that can be very cumbersome and expensive. Otherwise, a cell phone check-in. Well, not everybody has a cell phone. Some states have issued cell phones. Well, now you got to be responsible for your own mobile device, which maybe you don't want to be responsible for, or online internet check-in. But then, of course, that isn't in the rural areas. There isn't always internet connection available. And then also the practicality of you're doing you're working on a task at one moment to the next moment you're doing something else? Is it checking in and out every 15 minutes? There's still a lot of questions up in the air, and we've seen some states which have implemented it are encountering these right now, and they're trying to be flushed out. I think here in California, our hope is that we get through a lot of these concerns and answer a lot of these questions before this is implemented.
Right. So for folks just joining us, we're talking about EVV. If you have a question, please type it into the feed at the bottom of the video, and our folks will pick common questions. They'll ask here, we'll answer as best as we can. To reiterate what I said earlier, UDW has opposed the implementation of EVV in IHSS and in California. We have voiced that opposition to the department numerous times. We do know that if California doesn't implement, they will lose a lot of money funding for IHSS, so that is a significant problem that we do need to figure out. And the other thing I want to raise is what DSS has told us so far. And this is what they voiced at the stakeholder meeting in the fall. They are committed to implementing this in the least burdensome way possible and to cause the least amount of harm to consumers and providers. I do believe that they are sincere with that they feel that they must implement it because they don't want to lose the money. They had no choice in doing it. This is a federal mandate, so it's not like something that they developed themselves. So if they have to do it, how can they do it in the least painful way possible? And how much flexibility, frankly, is the federal government going to give California to do things as least intrusively as possible? So there, like Jordan said, a lot we still don't know, but the department has committed that they will continue to work with stakeholders and do this as a stakeholder involved process every step of the way. So while we oppose this and we will fight this, we also know we will have a seat at the table no matter what happens to make sure that our families and our communities are not impacted or impacted as minimally as possible. So we have a question from the feed, and we are happy to take questions.
Tina would like to know if we could back up a little bit and just kind of describe what is EVV exactly.
That's a great question. I actually have a copy of the requirement as stated in the law.
So EVV, electronic visit verification, has passed in the federal law, which was the 21st Century Cures Act. And it didn't have a whole lot of definition, but what it did say in the law is that is a system under which visits conducted as part of personal care or home health care services are electronically verified with respect to, and these are the items that the system, the new EVV system, must be able to capture. It must be able to capture the type of service performed, the individual receiving the service, the date of the service, the location of service delivery, the individual providing the service, and the time the service begins and ends. And so, in essence, you can consider it an app. It's an app online, or being able to call in via phone, or some other method, where currently a lot of things are done on paper, on timesheets in different states. This was an effort to, in one way you could say, okay, try to streamline a process. We understand that. But the concern is really when you're talking about all these things, where, when, who you're with, how long, then we start getting into some serious privacy concerns. So that is EVV and what it requires right now.
If for folks who are interested in reading the bill yourself, we do have a link on the UDW website that links directly to the text, and the web is www.udwa.com. And if you like this video, then you'll get updates as we learn more, so that way you stay tuned. So we have another question.
Melissa has a question that a lot of people are wondering about, and it's for family caregivers. She wants to know, she says, I'm a caregiver for my spouse and we live together. How would tracking affect our situation?
Well, the thing is, Melissa, we don't know because the department, frankly, hasn't gotten that far along in the process. What they have assured us is that they have no intention to make anybody have to stay home. There's no restriction on people going into the community. They don't intend for anyone's lives to change from how it is now. Again, this isn't something that California wants to do. It has to abide by this mandate. But they, in terms of how it reacts, people's lives, consumers and providers in the same home, it's still unclear. And that's why we have to be involved every step of the way to make this as least harmful as possible. So another question.
A lot of people have a lot of questions related to protective supervision and how, if you have 24-hour protective supervision, would you have to check in constantly?
Again, I think that's going to be one of those items, protective supervision, and specifically to California, as we have some nuances that other states don't. It's going to have to be really, really well thought out, and that's where input from advocacy groups like UDW and the ARC and others, and from stakeholders like individuals, and your testimony is going to be really important because it has a long way to go still. And so specifics, details about that, what we don't want to have happen is what is happening a little bit in other states where it gets implemented, and then all of a sudden people step back and say, oh, 24-hour protective supervision, what about that? Didn't think about that so well. Right. So we can't have that happen. Questions like that are going to be really important over the next 9 months.
Another question.
Lori has a really interesting question. She says, why are we hearing about task-oriented ins and outs when federal mandate only says times in and out, which sounds more like a day begin and out?
So Jordan read exactly what the statute says. It's the type of service performed, the date and the location, the individual providing, the time the service begins and ends. It isn't task specific. So to clarify that, I'm not aware, and I don't think that, there hasn't been guidance, frankly, from CMS, which is the Center for Medicare Services, that says it has to be task specific. I would hope that they give the state flexibility so that it could be as generic as possible. If I was to say, how could we do this as best, if it has to be done, what's the best way to do it? Can we, verify once a day, once a week, maybe once a month, that personal care services were provided? Can we make it as vague and general as possible so that it doesn't become another difficult aspect of what is already a very hard job? We know that being a home care worker is a really hard job, and you don't need another obstacle in your life to make your day even more difficult. So for more information, we want you to go to our website. It's www.udwa.org. Like this Facebook page and the video, and that way you'll get updates, because we will keep this continuously updated as we go. We have to remember, California is bigger. I want to say over half of the home care providers in the country are in California. So any other state that's doing this it's apples and oranges, and the department knows that. I don't know that the federal government knows that, but we will do everything in our power to convince them that they have to give us flexibility and latitude, because we're not a small pocket of people that is using an agency to get home care, which is how it is in most states. California has an IP model, which is very different, and we want to defend that model. We respect that model. That's what people prefer. This is a self-directed program. If we have to have EVV, how do we make self-direction, keep that as the foundation of the program? Jordan, could you speak a little bit to why you think they did this in the first place?
Well, so there are a few concerns that some individuals and groups at the federal level have had for a little while. One is the possibility of fraud in home care services. And this isn't a new conversation. And there have been some states where there really have been some elements of fraud that they have been detected. So how do you come up with a system to try to minimize that? Well, this is one option forward. Others might say, hey, you increase wages and you provide greater opportunities for people, and and then maybe that would be a better approach. So this is one approach that the federal government has decided to try to decrease the potential of fraud in the system by better tracking, knowing where people are, better systems, checks and balances. There is the potential that this has also been pushed forward by some organizations that could benefit from this. And you look at the lobbying record for, this is just public information, look at the lobbying record for this bill, and that was definitely some of the companies that create these systems.
Right.
So sometimes that's the way it works, and some of these companies may have pushed forward for this to be included in law, so that it would be mandated to be implemented in all states. And then there's the claim that CMS is also making that this is actually going to be more efficient, easier, a better process for individuals. And so I think you add all three of those together and you kind of get a picture of the origin of EVV, why now, why all of a sudden it was slipped into the 21st Century Cures Act bill. Not too many answers for those questions, but I think that the main drive, at least the main argument in favor of it, has been that this would help to prohibit and reduce any potential fraud in the system.
Which is an insult to those of us who do this work, right? Because this is something is not new for us in California. We know the fraud claim reared its ugly head here a while back under the different governor, and we had to show at that point that there was just no evidence to back up what people thought was rampant fraud in the IHSS program.
Yeah, it looks like an answer in search of a cure here, or a cure in search of a problem.
Right.
There's always been this notion and this idea out there that there must be fraud, and it just hasn't been shown, especially here in California. So it's going to have huge implications here, and unfortunately we're going to have to do our best to work with what we have.
We have another question.
First, we'd like to shout out some of our folks that are watching: Noreen, Johnny, Imari, Deb, Lori, Jeanette, Marzouk. Thanks, everybody. And Johnny has a question about other states and what other states are implementing this. And also, if you could confirm that it's happening everywhere.
So there's been about a dozen, I'm looking this way at my computer, there's been about a dozen states that have implemented it. Ohio, Illinois, Texas, several have gone forward, and some have moved forward already with the home health care provision, which isn't required until 2023. And some have just done the personal care and are waiting for the home health care. And
It's not that many, I could tell by looking at them.
yeah, it's about 10 or so states have done it so far. I understand there have been some states which have, like California, started out with some real concerns. Massachusetts, others have really laid out some concerns. To my knowledge, I don't know of any state yet that has decided to not move forward with it, and that is just because the penalty is pretty significant if you don't do it. As Christina mentioned, here in California alone, we're talking $200 million in the next 5 years. And that's just something that is hard for the state to lose. So I haven't heard of any states not moving forward with it, but some have, and hopefully we can learn from those lessons. Like I said, in some of the states, they're realizing that they haven't thought it completely through, and so that's what we want to make sure we do here in California.
Yeah, so to be clear, this is a mandate for every state, so they all will have to do it. But what we know is that maybe about 10 have done a version of EVV so far. So we have another question.
Yeah, Deb has a great question on the larger issue of long-term care. She wants to know what happens if this drives quality caregivers out of this line of work.
That is the number one argument that we've been making to the state, which is you have a very hard job that pays very little in wages, where you already have a problem recruiting and retaining workers. This just makes a hard job even harder. And unfortunately, it's a federal mandate. There's not much we can do to rescind or remove this right now federally. But what we can do is make it as least harmful as possible. But I think your point is absolutely true. How do we account for the fact that this is going to just make people even less likely to sign up to become home care workers? This is a problem, a system problem in California, the lack of caregivers around the state. And in fact, this ties into a larger question that we've been talking about here at UDW, which is the long-term sustainability of IHSS, because the growth in the program has just been extraordinary, but we don't see the number of caregivers to sustain the number of clients. And that's also a demographic issue with the population aging rapidly, and we have a less number of working age adults compared to the number of older adults. So I want to say hi to everyone who's joining us. My name is Christina Boss-Hamilton. I'm the Legislative Director for UDW, and I'm here with Jordan Lindsey from the ARC of California, and we're here to talk about EVV, what we know, what we don't know, hopefully dispel some rumors, and plug you in so that you find out, as we do moving forward, what's going on. So we have yet another question.
Hi, Jeanette wants to know, in the privacy questions about, she has other children in her home, and how will this affect their privacy, and how that can be legal?
That goes back, the privacy concerns.
Yeah, and what we can see at least in some other states, is that there is some flexibility in how states implement this and roll it out, in how intrusive, maybe it's the correct word, how intrusive the system is versus how much it allows flexibility. So when a person, the system we know has to check off certain things, and that is at the very least what's being performed by who, when, and where, and for how long, and whom other people are with, who's there, how much flexibility around that specific location, how far away from the home, in what areas could it be done. That is always the crux of the privacy concern. And so the one hope and the one goal is that no matter what happens, it doesn't restrict a person to their home more so than without EVV. If EVV is implemented and a single person around the state has to spend more time and is confined, restricted to their home because of the system, as opposed to being independent outside of the home and living in the community as much as possible, then we would consider that a tremendous failure in this law, because it would violate the Olmstead decision, it would violate a person's rights, and violate our society's goal of integrating people into the community more. And how it'll impact specific family members, I think that is an important question that's going to be part of the discussion moving forward.
So what we do know is that we will work hard to protect the privacy rights of our members and your families. And we will work with our partner organizations like the ARC of California and other stakeholder groups to do everything we can to push back against this. UDW firmly opposes implementing EVV in California. What we're talking now is, if California doesn't do it, what will happen? And if the state loses money for IHSS, what do we do then? Those are the important questions that are at the table for us, with you, with our partner allies, that we need to have those conversations. So another question, Shuri, for us.
Yeah, Deb wants to know how this will affect Respite Care.
I'm assuming, my guess is Respite Care for regional center clients, and if so, then what we are figuring out right now, and the ARC of California, for those who are just joining, represents and advocates for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families, and so primarily regional center clients throughout the state. And regional center clients at times can receive respite care so that the primary caregivers can have a time away from their family member if needed. And the regional center system does fall under one of the waivers that will be required and mandated by EVV. So Would it trickle down to respite? Well, not in the federal bill. It wouldn't necessarily impact respite. We know that a lot of regional center clients also utilize IHSS, and that is our main concern, is the IHSS and home health as well service. Would it impact respite? Those are discussions that we're going to have with the administration, and we're going to advocate that it does not impact respite services as well.
So, to remind you, go onto our website, www.udwa.org. You will find a link to the federal statute. You will find a link to our opposition letter. You will find a link to the various PowerPoint presentations that the feds have issued so far. Everything we know, we will put there so you have easy access to, and you can see exactly what's happening. So let's go down back to another question.
I want to shout out Marissa, Robin, and Elena. And Robin has a question. She wants to know if the ACLU is involved and what other groups are involved in working with the new regulation.
So that's a great question. I actually outreached to colleagues at the ACLU on Friday and asked them to take a look at this and to give us a preliminary assessment of it. We have requested that the state do a legal analysis of whether this is a violation of ADA, Olmstead, or any privacy statutes. In fact, we've said to the state that this is something that the Attorney General should look at, and everybody should be understanding if this is legal or not. So yes, totally aware of that and pushing for as much analysis as possible, and trying to get other organizations that have these concerns involved. Yes, Shuri, another question.
Yeah, Elena would like to know when this starts, and maybe you could give a brief overview for the people that have just joined us.
Yeah, so electronic visit verification, EVV, which was inserted into a federal law called the 21st Century Cures Act, is required to be implemented in states January 1st, 2018 for home care services. For home health services, January 1st, 2023. And so some states have already implemented, have already launched it. California is still in the information gathering stage. They have a request for information out there for different contractors that might be interested in submitting a proposal for this or requesting information. They've had one large stakeholder meeting, which was really sort of a listening session where they provided all the information that the state had. We expect there to be many more coming soon. And so EVV would be in essence an electronic form that would track when, where, how long, with whom home care services are being provided. And so it would require the provider to check in, to record all that information, for the consumer to approve it, as well as it would record where, kind of geo-track where the consumer is during that time. Now, a lot of that, there's some flexibility within that as well as how much the state, it appears to be some flexibility from the federal government as to how much the state will require, how intrusive it will be, how often checking in will have to happen. And so those are a lot of the questions that have to be answered. What we do know is that it has to do, at minimum, a certain few things, which is what I said, check with whom, where, when, how long, and the types of services being provided. Or if it does not do that, then the state would have to face a pretty hefty penalty.
We have another question.
Amari would like to know if the National Council on Independent Living has taken a position on this, as far as either of you know.
So a lot of disability groups are really involved on this, and at the forefront of a lot of the advocacy efforts are organizations, national coalitions. I'm not sure if the National Council on Independent Living, I know that they have, I've seen a letter, I believe, written by them, and I can't speak for them, but I actually think they are actively opposed to it, if I remember correctly. And in other states, the protection and advocacy groups in those states, and here in California it's called Disability Rights California, have been very involved with opposing it and addressing concerns that are brought to their attention from consumers and families and providers, and raising those to the state. And that's something which our organizations will be doing as well. But I know that almost universally, disability groups have a lot of concerns with how this is going to be implemented in their state.
Another question.
Yeah, first we'd like to shout out Royal and Hannah and Sin, Tina, Felicia, and Michelle has a question. She wants to know if both the caregiver and the recipient will be required to wear a tracking device.
So the answer is we don't know yet. And the other answer is not if we can help it. That is absolutely outrageous. And in my opinion, if we have anything to do about it, absolutely never going to happen. Our goal is to make this as least harmful as possible. So what we don't know is what this will look like. We don't know yet, is this going to be a phone? Is it going to be an app? Is this going to be a device? Where does the device go? All of that remains to be seen. So we want to really reassure people, these decisions haven't been made yet. What we know is what's in the federal statute, which simply lists 5 criteria that need to happen, which is verifying where the service is provided, what type of service, when it starts, when it stops, who provides it, and who receives it. Our hope, and this is something that California has pledged to us, is that they will implement this in the least burdensome way possible. And that is why we need to continue to have advocacy and be involved, and why we need people to get involved and volunteer and join up and sign your name and do everything that you can to help us here in Sacramento have those conversations with the department and let them know what we think is the right thing to do. Yes, Shuri, another question.
Elvia has a great question. What about people who don't have internet access? Will the government provide internet access?
And that's been a big implementation concern, because if it's a call-in system, is it a landline required? Well, then if it's a landline, then you have to be at your house. If it's going to be a cell phone, well, then what if you don't have a cell phone? If it's going to be internet, what if you're in a rural area and you don't have internet access, or you just don't have internet or a computer at your house? And so those are the very, very, very important implementation questions that need to be answered by the department, and those are the conversations that we need to have. It's like Christina said, it's really going to come down to individuals like you making sure that great questions like that are brought to the department's attention, and you do that through being involved in the stakeholder process, being involved with your organizations like UDW and the ARC, and making sure that those important questions are fleshed out and the answers are there before anything is implemented. So again, unfortunately, we know less than we would like to at this time, and that's just because this process has a long way to go in California, and because the requirement coming down from the federal government is fairly broad. And so it'll take a lot of advocacy and information and meetings to really start answering some of those questions.
So for folks just joining us, you can go on our website, which is udwa.org. On the website, you can submit your phone number if you want to get text alerts. That's a very easy way to get up-to-date information as soon as possible. You can sign up for our email blast. If you click like below this video, then you will get updates from our Facebook page. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm sure you guys have your own social media presence.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Just facebook.com/thearcca. That's the ARCCA, and you could definitely follow along with all of our advocacy efforts on this issue as well.
So we're here talking about EVV and what we know, what we don't know, how will it apply to IHSS and the other personal care services programs that are Medicaid funded in California. To reiterate what we said earlier, if California does not implement this mandate, it will lose tens of millions up to hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. That's what makes this a sticky situation, because on the one hand, we don't want this to happen. But on the other hand, what do we do when we lose tens and hundreds of millions of dollars? And to be clear, I'm not exaggerating, the department did issue a estimate of penalties, and by their estimates, in the first year, they would lose 15.5 million, and by year 5, it would be up to 219 million, and that's per year, and that's every year moving forward. So it's not a one-time thing. It increases every year. What do we do about that? How do we protect our program and make sure that services continue to be funded and that people continue to get what they are entitled to? So that's what makes this a really hard problem. And what you know from listening to Jordan and I is that we will be here every step of the way to lead the path and to do everything we can to oppose this. Going back now, Sheree, we have another question.
Yeah, Heather has a question about what the union is doing, as you've been explaining, but what is our role in this process? Could you go on about that a little?
Sure. So the department has committed to a widespread stakeholder process. So for folks who may have followed, when we just implemented electronic timesheets in IHSS, to be clear, this is not electronic timesheets. EVV and ETS are two different things. But when we did the electronic timesheets, we actually did it in a pretty comprehensive way where we had consumers and providers participate in pilots. We had focus groups where they tested the technology. All of that was done through your organization, your union representing you here in Sacramento, having those conversations with the Department of Social Services and making those things happen, and organizing our members to participate, bringing them into our offices, and basically providing the link between the field and what is happening in your homes and what's happening here in Sacramento. So our role as your union is to be your advocate, your voice here in Sacramento, to give you what we know, to give you the most accurate information, and to call on you when we need you to give us input and to communicate directly to the department. And we will continue to play that role. Another question, if you want to ask a question, folks, you can go on the feed and type it out. If it's a question that's very common and several people have it, we are likely to pick it so that we can answer here.
Several people would like to know how they find out which legislators supported EVV.
Well, so at the state level, there hasn't been anything for a legislator to vote on. That was an administrative decision. So the administration decided to implement it instead of having a $200 million loss to our state. At the federal level, this was part of the 21st Century Cures Act, and you can go online and find the register for that. And I can actually try to look it up while we're talking with you to see which California members of Congress voted for it. Again, it was part of a larger bill, one that dealt with everything from mental health services to prescriptions. And so this was something which the bill wasn't primarily addressing, however, it was still part of it. So again, a big omnibus bill, it's hard to dissect really what an individual is voting for and against. But here in California, there hasn't necessarily been a vote whether or not in favor or against it. That doesn't mean, however, that legislators in California won't be an important part of the discussion. And so as we start working with the department and the administration on what this is going to look like, if things start to go in a direction that you don't like, that we don't like, then one of the best allies that we can have are our elected officials, our state legislators, our assembly members and senators, especially if they are involved in health and human services and on a committee or have a relationship with the department in that way. And so getting involved with them, making sure they know about your concerns is really important at this point in the game. Come January 1st, 2019, this is going to be implemented, and it's going to be hard to change things after that. So actually right now is a really good time, if you have a meeting with your local elected official, to bring this to your attention. Say, this is really important to us and our community. We want you to keep an eye on this, UDW is going to be on this issue as well. We want you to meet with them to talk about this, and then you could let us know and say, hey, you let your organization know that you met with this person and that's on their radar.
Okay, Cherie, what other questions do we have?
Several people have questions. They're worried that the expensive EVV could lead to cuts to IHSS.
That's a great question. What is key here is balancing the cost of implementing EVV versus the cost of the penalty, which is the reduced federal funding for IHSS. Part of the bill, the federal bill, which you can link to if you go to our website, you can link to the bill, and for those who want to look up the roll call votes, you can use that citation number to go do a Google search. You can find those federal voting records. Our website is udwa.org. You can also like this video on Facebook, which will also give you frequent updates. So what the bill says is that the federal government will reimburse states up to 90% of the cost of implementing EVV. So the question is, even if the feds pick up 90% and the state is picking up the remaining 10%, what does that remaining 10% cost versus what the penalty is if they don't implement it? And frankly, other costs that maybe aren't immediately obvious, but administrative costs. What if they get sued? What kind of legal costs would they get? We want to make sure that they do a really thorough cost-benefit analysis before they do anything. Again, you want to like our Facebook page. You want to go to our website. You can sign up for text alerts, for email alerts, to stay up to date as much as possible.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that was beneficial, well, not beneficial, but the one thing that will be helpful, as Christina mentioned, is that the federal government, at least for a portion of the implementation of it, will cover 90% of the cost. But Christine brought up a really good point in that there are additional costs with the implementation, as well as this is the type of people who've been doing this for a while, and you who have been involved with policy for a while, this is the type of issue which you can easily see ending up in the courts. And there could definitely be some costs associated with that for different states. So I think there's a lot of things for the state to consider.
So for those just joining us, my name is Christina Boss-Hamilton. I'm with UDW. I'm here with Jordan Lindsey from the ARC of California, one of our partners here in Sacramento, as we fight for the rights of the providers and consumers in IHSS. Right now, more important than ever, membership. We want you to join your union so that we can do the best job possible protecting this program. What we know, and I'll say this very honestly, is that in other states where providers are not organized, where they don't have an advocacy voice, that's where they get railroaded. That's where the state goes about implementing these type of things in a half-cooked, ill-conceived, and frankly chaotic way. And without a unified voice, without a presence here in Sacramento, that's what we would be seeing here in California. Advocacy is the most important thing that you can do, and joining your union to advocate on your behalf is the most important thing you can do, because know for sure no one else will do this. No one else will speak for the rights of the provider, and by virtue, your families and your clients. Membership is most important. You can join by going to joinudw.org. That's a very easy way to join. You can go to our website, www.udwa.org. You can like our Facebook page, call our 800 number. We need you to get involved now more than ever. Do you want to talk any about the ARC and what your thinking is now moving forward in terms of advocacy?
Yeah, so this has really turned into, from a national effort where our national office was involved in the discussions, and there's still a lot of concerns and opposition at the national level to a lot of the discussions happening at the state level. And so our discussions are going to happen a lot with the department, with the various regional centers throughout the state about if this is going to come to California, then, as we've been saying all along, what is the minimal impact it can have to the delivery of services, to, most importantly, a person's independence, and also to the provider's ability to provide quality care without nuisance and being impacted negatively by EVV. So our discussions are going to happen with the department along with other advocacy organizations, and there's a lot of interest in this, especially because so many regional center clients are also recipients of IHSS, as many of you know, and making sure that when it does get implemented, or if when it gets implemented, that all of the concerns from the community and gathering those stories, gathering those concerns have been brought to attention and been addressed.
Where can folks go to find out more information about the ARC?
The ARCCA.org. So the ARC, ARCCA.org.
Excellent. So again, this is Christina Boss Hamilton with UDW. I'm here with Jordan Lindsey from the ARC of California. We are reiterating our opposition to the EVV mandate, but what we have to be real with is this is a federal mandate, and if California doesn't implement it, will lose tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. And our job as UDW is to represent the interests of our members. That's what we do. That's what we get paid to do. We get up every morning and we fight as hard as we can to take care of the program, to protect it, to protect its funding, to make sure that providers are represented, and to make a very hard job a better job, a more dignified job with a living wage, with health benefits, all of those things that people need in order to take care of their families. Again, if you have a question, you can submit it on the feed below the video. It looks like we have another question, Sheree?
Yeah, I want to shout out Elvie and Heather, Aaron, Rose, and Desiree. And Rosa wants to know, when will we know?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So we know that California will implement it. That is what they've told us. They have committed that they will do so in a way that is as respectful and as stakeholder involved, as least harmful as possible. We are monitoring what's happening very closely and having constant conversations with them. As there are updates, we will send them to you. The law says it has to be implemented by January 1, 2019. However, the law also says that if states need more time because of the effort and the amount of work they're doing, it's just not going to be enough time, they can request an exemption, which in my opinion, California absolutely would need more time if they were going to do this right. So it should be implemented January 1st, 2019. But we would push for a delayed implementation. As we get important decisions from the state, we will convey them to you. We are working hard to protect your privacy, to protect your interests, you and your clients and your communities, because we know that what you do is so important. Another question, Sheree.
Yeah, Brandy would like to know when the next California stakeholder meeting is.
I don't believe we have a date for that yet.
I haven't seen one yet. I would expect to see something soon. If California is on the timeline for January 1st, then there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. That is something which we can contact them right away and ask. It's a good question.
I want to say in March, but they haven't released anything yet. Again, they committed to doing this hand in hand with stakeholders. We will hold them to that. Another question.
Yeah, for some of the people that are joining us later, a lot of people have questions as family caregivers and people who have protective supervision. Could you maybe reinforce that there's a lot of people in their boat?
Yeah, absolutely. So, especially things like protective supervision, which have a lot of nuances in of itself. Trying to place this system on top of that is going to take a lot of care and coordination. And that's something which this process, which we are going to insist that the administration is actively involved in, and stakeholder input. That's what it's going to be for. And so what we don't want to have happen, like we've mentioned, is where it gets implemented, it's launched, and there are things that haven't been considered, and we've seen that in other states. And so that would be the worst scenario possible. And so those types of questions, especially from the community like yourselves who are in that situation with that particular type of service, that's going to be something that's going to have to be very well thought out. And so definitely want you involved in the discussion of the process.
Right, so basically we don't have the answers for a lot of this, and clearly that uncertainty is terrifying, and we absolutely know that folks are anxious, they're concerned, they have questions. That's why we organized this Facebook Live event. We want to get what we know out there to you. Again, like the Facebook page for UDW, go to the ARC of California's Facebook page, go to our websites, udwa.org. We are monitoring what's happening closely. We are in daily conversations with the Department of Social Services to make sure that if this has to happen, it is done in the most beneficial, least harmful way possible. That is the most important thing. So what I urge you to do is make sure that we have your contact information. You can sign up again via text. We will update you on everything that we find out. We will stay in conversation with you. You can also call our 800 number, which is on our website, to call your local union office and talk to somebody. If you'd rather have a conversation, you're always welcome to call us here in Sacramento. Our job is to be there for you, to represent you, to advocate for you. And that is what will happen in these months moving forward. Any last thoughts for people, Jordan?
I really like what you said at the end there, in that there is a lot of anxiety out in the community here in Sacramento, and we're feeling that as well. And so while it's in an uncertain time, these next several months are going to be really critical in how EVV takes shape and what it's going to look like. So most importantly for you is to stay really engaged and involved, and be involved with your organizations. And what we commit is to continue to get that information out as we hear it, as well as actively advocate. So exactly as Christina said, that it won't have a huge impact, and that it will have the least restrictions and the least impact as possible.
So we want to thank everybody who watched us today, who participated by submitting questions. You can watch this video after we're done with the live streaming. You can share this video. Go to our website, www.udwa.org. Like our Facebook page. Sign up for alerts. We will be with you. Don't forget, we need folks to join as union members, because the only way we can advocate for you is when we have a strong membership. Go to joinudw.org for more information. Again, thank you. Thank you so much, Jordan. This was super fun. Very difficult conversation, but important that we keep having them. Thank you, guys.